Hi, I'm Michelle Talbert, the host of the podcast Her Power Hustle and the author of Why White Guys Having Fun Make Great Mentors for Black Women, the ebook to which this is also attached as a bonus. So thank you so much for purchasing the ebook. Thank you so much for being part of the Her Power Hustle community. And thank you so much for being open to the great information that is about to be shared with you. Following our conversations that I had with some pretty amazing guys, specifically Guy Kawasaki, Dave McClure, Michael Simmons, and Peter Shankman. So what will follow immediately after my voice, it will be an explanation, also in my voice, of what prompted this series of interviews with white guys having fun. Let's put it that way. So please tune in. You'll hear the explanation, and then we'll get right into the next interview. Thanks so much. You can learn more at herpowerhustle.com. And of course, tune into the podcast, Her Power Hustle.
There's a book by Reginald F. Lewis I mentioned in the email that I sent to you, and it's called Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? And it was really about his, right? Isn't that amazing? And it's about his journey as an entrepreneur and how he built himself up in the 80s and 90s. And for me personally, I'm an African-American woman, but I've had mentors that look like the rainbow. And I was recently back at my undergrad speaking with students of color, and I said, every mentor you have is not going to look like you. And it hit me, hey, why don't we talk to a bunch of white guys, and I'll get back to why you're one of the white guys. Why don't we talk to a bunch of white guys and see what they have to say about mentorship and be mentored by people who don't look like us? So really what this is a series of conversations that I'm having with you and Pat Flynn and Guy Kawasaki and Peter Shankman about different aspects of your career and how others can learn from you. So it's like a master class of sorts. And so it's not a show per se right now. Right now it's just me saying, if I could put together my ultimate board of advisors to mentor me and others who look like me or a little bit like me, who would be on that panel? And you were the number one email.
Next up is Dave McClure. Dave McClure is a venture capitalist and founding partner at 500 Startups, which is an internet startup seed fund and incubator program located in Mountain View, California. He likes to hang out with entrepreneurs and occasionally invest in startups foolish enough to let him in. He has been an investor in over 250 companies, including TaskRabbit, SlideShare, and CreditKarma. He's been geeking out in Silicon Valley for over 20 years and has worked with companies such as PayPal, Intel, Microsoft, Facebook, LinkedIn, just a couple of household names to name a few. Years ago, he used to do real work like, coding, marketing, and running conferences, but these days he mostly does useless stuff like sending lots of email, blogging, and hanging out on Facebook and Twitter, which is where I found him. Dave and I discuss how he went from engineer to entrepreneur to angel investor to juggernaut. We talk about why he thinks diversity is important, why it matters to him, and a myriad of other things, such as Women Entrepreneurs Day, and his feelings on why women should be empowered through investing and being investors themselves and being on boards. And as angel and investor himself, he has really good insight about a number of things. And finally, of course, I have to ask him, why does he curse so much? Those questions and many more are answered in this upcoming interview with Dave McClure.
Kind of didn't have a lot of mentorship in my career, and maybe I can tell you what pitfalls to avoid. I'm not sure if I have a lot of great mentorship stories, but I can tell you what I went through.
So obviously, thank you for agreeing to join me on this series. I do have a couple of questions in my show, which is called They Met Online. We kind of let the conversation ebb and flow, which is what I'm going to do with you and be respectful of the time. But I do have a couple of questions to start us off, and we'll see where the conversation goes. One thing I want to point out to the audience is that I found you on Twitter because I was listening to Stanford Entrepreneur Series, I think it was. You were giving a presentation, and you said something that just stood out to me that made me jump on Twitter right away and tweet you. And that was you were tired of looking around Silicon Valley and seeing all of these button-down blue shirt, khaki-wearing white guys. and you wanted Silicon. You remember that, huh? So you wanted Silicon Valley to look differently than it was currently looking. And I jumped on it and I said, Dave, watch me. I'm a startup founder. I'm going to get it together. Just watch me. Just kick in the door, and I'm coming in behind you. So I just really appreciate you, because since then you have been approachable. I tweet you the craziest stuff when things go down, and you're always very responsive. So I want to ask you, what brought you, first of all, to the world of entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley itself? How did you get here?
Sure. I guess I was born in West Virginia. I grew up in West Virginia and Maryland, kind of in the D.C. and Baltimore area, and went to school at Hopkins in Baltimore back in the mid-'80s. I had been wanting to come out west, at least in the late 80s. There's a lot going on out here. There's a lot going on kind of in Japan, and this seemed like a cool place to go. I spent the first few years when I was out here really as an engineer and software developer, and then kind of gradually shifted my way over onto the business marketing side. I started the company with some friends in the mid-'90s. Not really a great adventure. I kind of screwed up a bunch with that, but they kind of tell you experience is what you get when you don't get what you want, and I got a lot of experience. But ended up with a small exit out of that, really not a lot of money, but, like I said, a lot of lessons learned. And then from there, I took a little bit of time off, and, I guess we got acquired by a company. I stayed with the company for about a year and a half, then took a little bit of time off, came back, and ended up at PayPal in early 2000, late 2001.
Wow.
And then that was a pretty rough time in the Valley, but actually a pretty great place to be during that time. So that was kind of right after the 2001 dot-com blow up. But
yeah.
PayPal was a fun place. They were really doing well and kind of got there right before they went public and then acquired by eBay. As I was kind of leaving PayPal in 2004, that's when I started doing angel investing. And that was mostly recreational. I really didn't know a lot, again, about what I was doing, but, was following in the footsteps of folks like Frank Hoffman and Peter Thiel and Ron Conway and others. And made about, 13 investments over a period of 4 years, about $300,000 in total.
That's aggressive.
Three of those 13 companies, other people might have put their money into real estate or something. I really didn't feel like I knew what I was doing with real estate. But kind of ended up just, putting money into companies that I liked or that were run by people that I felt like I had some sense for what they were doing. And we got kind of lucky over the next 4 to 6 years. 3 of those companies got acquired for, north of $100 million. And so made a little bit of money in that sort of world. And I guess after that I was trying to figure out how to start my own fund, and that was also a challenging exercise. But after I ended up spending a couple of years at Founders Fund working for Sean Parker and Peter Thiel, eventually got my own sort of fund off the ground in 2010. So that was kind of the last 20, 25 years in the Valley was, engineer, entrepreneur, marketer, angel investor, and then eventually kind of a relatively small-time venture capitalist, but I'm trying to make something of myself someday.
Why was it important to you to start a fund? Why did you see that as your next logical move or illogical move, whatever? Why was that your next move?
Well, I guess I felt like I was really having some challenges trying to figure out whether I was a good entrepreneur or not. And, maybe someday I'll say that I'm a passable entrepreneur. But I felt like I had some decent eye for talent on the investing side, and that had started to work. At least, like I said, I made some angel investments and looked like they were doing okay. I enjoyed working with entrepreneurs. I kind of had experience on both engineering and marketing side. So for a lot of folks who were engineering founders, they kind of trusted that I could speak their language, but I could also maybe help them on the marketing piece. And so, I just, wanted to generally help people in the Valley kind of figure out things a lot faster than I did. I sort of felt like it took me 15, 20 years to really understand how all the pieces fit together, and I
Okay.
felt like there's an opportunity to really maybe shorten that time frame for other people and make that more like 2 years rather than 20. And, I've been following the trend with, incubators, accelerators, and seed funds and angel investing. So I was, eager to try my own hand at it and maybe try a different way to go after that business.
The day that we're recording this is November 19th, 2014, and it happens to also be UN Women Entrepreneurs Day. And so I noticed, exactly, right? How fortuitous. A couple of years ago, you wrote an article for TechCrunch telling women in tech to put their money where their mouth is. And so, you might have pissed people off with that one, but that's okay.
White guy mansplaining to women on what to do with their money.
That's why you're on this call. So why are you such a zealot? I'll call a zealot. You may not call yourself a zealot, but why do you have such zeal for increasing diversity in tech and startups? Why do you think that is? Where is that coming from? Because you could just kind of rest on your laurels, dude.
Well, I guess I feel like I was kind of an underdog, and coming from West Virginia, maybe I didn't feel like I came from rich and powerful kind of people, but I sort of managed to figure out how to hustle my way to some level of success in Silicon Valley. But my mom was an entrepreneur growing up. She was kind of a really significant role model in my life. I think a lot of the people that I was friends with were first generation, second generation immigrants from other countries, Korea, India, China, various places in Africa or other folks. And so I kind of always identified with a lot of people who had moved to the U.S. or were from other places. I kind of identified with people who weren't necessarily traditional white male guy who went to Stanford or MIT. Even though I do have a lot of friends who are, from those worlds, I have a lot of friends who aren't. So, I don't know. I guess the goal with a lot of the getting women to invest kind of story was that I think a lot of women talk from the perspective of the entrepreneur asking for money from, white guy VCs, and I feel like the problem is probably best solved from women who can write checks and really empowering themselves as investors, not necessarily as entrepreneurs asking men for money.
Right.
So I think just reframing that issue is like, look, whether or not you make money, you can probably learn a lot about how the investing world works by becoming part of it. And, potentially as a result of that, maybe even taking on board seats. And so a lot of the positions of power that are dominated by white males, investors and board members might start shifting to the, other side of the table, shall we say.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so you mentioned India, so I'll just take you there, especially since you just got back. You're interested in investing a lot abroad in places like India, and I know that's a big movement for you right now. Why do you think that's a good move for investors? And I'm going to ask you a compound question. And what do you say to folks who say you should keep your money here in the States? You as an investor, meaning the global you, should keep your money here in the United States versus going to other places and investing. So that compound question of why is it a good idea, and what do you say to folks who want you to keep it here?
Yeah, well, I think the answer to both of those questions is really coming from the fact that most of the growth happening in the world is coming in other places than the U.S. and emerging markets in particular, places like Latin America, Southeast Asia, India, China, Middle East, Africa. So, a lot of the traditional sources of where capital comes from and goes to in terms of the U.S. and Europe, those places have slower growth rates and really aren't necessarily the best places to invest capital for returns, although there's certainly a lot still going on in tech in the U.S. But we think there's, particularly because a lot of the style of investing which we've done over the past 4 or 5 years, investing in relatively low-cost software-based companies, at least in the first 2 years, they tend to be low-cost. that model travels well overseas. And there's also just a lot more people online these days.